I want to welcome everybody to this webinar and thank you for joining us. I think it's going to be great. I'm especially happy that Hank and Susan are with us and you're going to hear a lot from them. We're going to make them tell us a ton of amazing stories. We could probably do a 5 or 6 hour seminar and just get started. But really are glad you're here, and I think this is going to be great. And what we're going to try to do is just have a conversation among us about the themes of this book. And I will say to Michael and Panos, congratulations. I think it's a great book. I read it because I'm Panos's friend and I know Michael, so I was curious, but halfway through it, I was thinking, man, this book is just what I needed to read right now. It's so inspiring. It's got so many cool ideas. And I think to me, the basic theme was empowering musicians to realize the skill set that we have, that we can use in all sorts of endeavors in life, and empowering others who are trying to lead, manage, and create to learn from musicians, because most of us love and admire music, but I'm not sure we ever fully understood its power to apply to other domains of life, like biotechnology or writing a novel or whatever. So we're going to start with some brief self-introductions, and I have told the panel that if they're not willing to share all their accolades, I'll step in and add a few. I want people to be a little immodest, so you know who you're dealing with here. I'm Roger Brown. I'm the president of Berklee College of Music. Before that, I had a career as an entrepreneur. And before that, I spent 10 years running refugee relief programs and other programs overseas. I'll be stepping down as Berklee's president in just a few weeks, but it's been the job of a lifetime, and I've been doing it for 17 years. So Panos, tell us who you are.
Sure, thank you, Roger. I am Panos Panay. I'm currently Senior Vice President for Global Strategy and Innovation at Berklee, where I like to liken my job to a kid in a candy shop or a musician in a guitar shop if you're a guitar player. Prior to that, I founded a company called Sonic Bids that I ran for 13 years, which I'm proud to say that it's a platform that connects bands and music promoters, and over 1 million gigs happened through the platform while I was leading the company. And even before that, I was a talent agent for a lot of known artists such as Pat Metheny, Chick Corea, Leonard Cohen, Nina Simone, Ladysmith Black Mambazo. And I'm originally from Cyprus and a very proud Berklee alumnus. And of course, now the co-author of Two Beats Ahead.
Good. Michael, tell us about yourself.
Hi, folks. Michael Hendrix. I'm a partner at design and innovation firm IDEO. I'm the global design director. I'm also an assistant professor of music business at Berklee. Before I got to IDEO, I was also an entrepreneur, which is the connection that Panos and I have. I started a business in Tennessee to help the software application of textile design. I'm new to the music industry. I've had a passion for music my whole life. I've played music my whole life, but it's only been in the last 5 or 6 years that I've gotten to know so many amazing people in this world. Also co-author of this book.
Fantastic. Hank, tell us about yourself.
Hi, Roger. I'm Hank Shocklee. I'm co-producer of the legendary rap group called Public Enemy. Also created the Bomb Squad as well as the production unit as well. And also was a senior vice president of Universal Music Group. And also, and currently, I guess now I'm more associated with the Consumer Technology Association, which is, I'm also the ambassador and I'm also a member. And I love technology and I love innovation. And so this book is right up, it's kind of like right up my alley. I'm very happy to be a part of it.
Well, let me just add that you cannot hear a piece of modern music without hearing the influence of Hank Shocklee. Both the sounds, the sampling, many of the ideas you pioneered as a producer and an artist have become so influential that they've really transformed modern music. And you all led the way towards hip hop making more of a social statement and commenting on the world around us. And that again changed the direction of the music. So we're honored to have you here with us, Hank.
Thank you.
Susan, tell us about yourself.
I'm Susan Rogers. I'm currently a professor in the Department of Music Production and Engineering at Berklee. Prior to that, the way I got there was I've worked as an audio technician starting in Southern California, and I saw signing on, one of our audience members, I saw John Clavin from Southern California. If that's the John Clavin I know, we worked together at Audio Industries in the late 70s in Hollywood. And then I was a recording engineer and a record producer and a mixer. I did all that. And then I had a great success in in 98, the late 90s with Bare Naked Ladies. And when you had big success in those days, you get the big royalty checks. I don't know about you all, but I miss those days. Anyway, with that big royalty money, I left the music business, went to college, did 8 straight years, got a PhD in a program in behavioral neuroscience. And I study the brain on music. I'm probably best known for my work with Prince. I was his engineer from 83 until 87. And that was Purple Rain through Sign of the Times and the Black Album. Prince disappeared a little bit after that, and Hank is to blame. When Hank's innovative technology, the work he started doing in the late 70s, which, as Roger said, which everyone then copied in the 80s, was the wave that temporarily took Prince and Michael Jackson and others out of the game. It's a real privilege to be here, to even be in his company is a real privilege. Thanks for the book, Panos and Michael. Thanks for linking the two worlds of business and musical thinking.
Thank you, Susan.
And Susan, I will add, not only does she have a PhD and knows a lot about music cognition, so she can help us understand why we love the music that she worked on with Prince and Bare Naked Ladies and others. But Susan is an amazing professor, and people love her her skills as a teacher. So anyway, what an amazing panel. Michael and Panos, I thought I'd start with you all. Tell us about the germination of the idea to write a book like this. How did that happen?
Well, a lot of it started by, frankly, you asking me to come to Berklee and develop what we ended up calling the Berklee Institute for Creative Entrepreneurship. And I started thinking, man, I know how to start a business, but I've never thought of my own process in a meta way, in a way that you go about teaching entrepreneurship. I didn't even know you could teach entrepreneurship. I still probably am not sure you can teach entrepreneurship. But in that process, I started looking at my own background and realized that the way that I related and saw the world and connected with the world was a direct byproduct of my musical background, and that I thought and emoted and related as a musician. When Michael and I connected at a conference, actually, at a conference about innovation and creativity in Boston, we just had this intuitive connection, and we realized that we were both entrepreneurs. We both had a passion for music, but we also, he as a designer, me as a musician, we saw this sort of juxtaposition, if you will, of the entrepreneurial mindset and the musical mindset and the creative mindset as really one and the same. That the dichotomy that tends to exist between the belief that somehow you have your brain on business and your brain on creativity, that is just a false dichotomy. So this led us down the path of thinking about writing the book.
Yeah, Michael, what would you add?
I would add that, being in the business of innovation, I had not thought often about how the subconscious things I had learned as a musician were influencing my activities as a creator in other fields. And so when Panos and I did start discussing that, it was an aha moment and kind of a wah, wah, wah trombone moment too. Because how come you didn't realize this is what you were doing your whole life? It's right there. But I think what we realized is that, you know, the value we could bring to that conversation was just starting to name the terminology that we saw happening in the way that people thought, so that it could be called on when you want it. You know, like I think many creative people are intuitively successful, you know, and as you gain experience, you get better at it over time. But what we believe is that if you can begin to understand these different mindsets earlier in your career, you really have a leg up. You don't have to have that life experience to start to understand why you're making the decisions you're just making, or how you can apply these mindsets to other parts of your life. So that was highly motivating to us in teaching at Berklee. It's been highly motivating to us in writing the book.
Fantastic. Well, I will say again, I think it's really, really an amazing book, and I found it very inspiring. Hank, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I remember in the book it mentioned that you said you were trained as an economist, not as a musician, and that you feel like you've often been a bridge between the business mind, the creative mind, the musical mind, the more linear mind. And I do think that it strikes me that your career has often been kind of bridging. And another interesting part of the book to me was you reflecting on what is the role of a producer, particularly for a hyper creative artist. You know, how do you not micromanage that person? And honestly, I think when you lead any institution, that's one of the big challenges, is how do you lead without suffocating people, without dictating to people, without demotivating people? And your career seems like such an example of that. So could you just reflect a little bit on all that for us?
Sure. First of all, I try to make it fun. That's the number one thing. I think that if as long as you're having a great time at doing what you're doing, then you will be more interested and you'll be more engaged. One of the hardest things is being a producer is managing the egos, because you have to be respectful of everybody's place, and you have to also be able to light-handedly move them around, if you would. So you kind of like have to put your psychological hat on and become their friend. Sometimes you have to become their parent. Sometimes you have to become their brother. It depends on what the application is and what you're trying to get out of people. And I think that one of the most precious resources we have is human intuition or understanding or human energy, and you just try to manage it as tactfully as possible, keeping in mind of the goal of what you need to get done at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like it's a kind of a multitask skill.
Well, I think one of the themes of the book is this idea that the metaphor of the producer in music is really helpful for other leadership roles. So I'm wondering if anyone else has any reflections on that.
Well, I was going to say that I'd love to hear from you, because in many ways, hearing Hank talk about his role as a producer makes me think of you and your management style and the way that you create space for others to express their talents. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I do, and this will be the last time I want to hear from you all. But if you lead something in the modern world, there's no way you're going to understand the technology better than your best technology people, or the science better than your best scientists, or the music better than the best session musicians you can hire, or the digital marketing better than someone who's done nothing but that. So you really have to have a humility in your approach that says, my job isn't to tell you what to do, it's to bring the team together, listen to good ideas, and try to forge a sense of common direction. And I do think that old model of that autocratic model of where the boss knows best and tells everybody what to do makes no sense, because no boss can understand all those things. And if you think you do, you're kidding yourself. And even someone like, you read the Steve Jobs biography, he could be a very autocratic person, but there were some people who had expertise that he didn't have, and he fully empowered and listened to them. So I think that producer metaphor is a very powerful one.
I love that you explain it that way, Roger. And you know, in the book, there's actually a Hank story in the book about working with Slick Rick and the number of producers that went before him that tried to work with him and just couldn't make it happen. They couldn't figure that thing out you're talking about, of creating the right conditions. I was wondering, Hank, if you could tell that story.
I mean, it's funny because I just happened to be working. I think I was working under Bill Adler, and he was writing the book for the Run DMC book, and I just ran across the roster and I saw that they had Slick Rick signed, and he hasn't put out a record in 2 years. And so I said, you know, what's up with him? You know, what you know, why is he hasn't been able to get in the studio? And they said they flat out said that Rick doesn't like anybody. He hated Russell. He hated Rick. So there was nobody that wanted to work with him. So I said, well, let me go and at least sit down with him and see whether we can do something. And lo and behold, I met with him, you know, met with him in his house at his mother. And he showed me some demos that he was working on, and he wanted to, you know, get those demos across. And so the thing was, with that particular project, my role was more to help him shape his ideas into a record, and giving him the space and the confidence to be able to know that he can go through that process and make it work. And at the same time, managing him to get my ideas across of what I thought this thing should be, without necessarily letting it feel like it came from my idea.
Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. And that's a real function. That's not just, I think the best artists almost always have someone like that. And Susan, I wanted to turn to you because you were not only a witness to Prince's creativity, and I think it's probably safe to say that there may have been no more productive, prolific, or creative artist in the 20th century than Prince, but you were important to him, and he had a technique of bringing in young artists who he would discover and jamming with them and playing with them. So he kind of instinctively knew that he benefited from the ideas and creativity of others. Just tell us what that was like to be in those rooms.
He was extraordinary. You're absolutely right about that. And to use his own lyric, those kinds of cars don't pass you every day. Sometimes people will ask me about his methodology in the hopes of they'll copy his methodology and they'll turn out like he did. But no, he was too extraordinary for that. But he was really exceptional in his capacity to recognize nascent talent. He really had an eye for and an ear for talent. Something that Hank was just saying made me think that, you know, one of the things that musicians are great at, in addition to communicating and being on output, they're really good at being on input, reading other people, reading where their talent and their art is coming from. Hank did that for Slick Rick. He was able to read, I think I can tell where this guy is coming from, and I think I can pull talent up out of him and shape it into something. And Prince was really good about that. Wendy Melvoin was 18 years old when she joined his band. I was not an engineer at all. I was an audio technician, and he put me in the engineering role. I knew the equipment, but I hadn't engineered anything ever before. And he just recognized, you can do this, you can do this. And that was bold, but he was accurate because he could read talent so well, and he knew what to do with people.
Tell us a few of the most breathtaking moments where you heard something, or did you realize when you heard some of this music go down just how seminal it was?
Oh, Roger, every day. So if you've heard there's an album that was released a few years ago called 1983, A Piano and a Microphone. And it's just Prince. There's a boombox recording him at the piano. And you hear that mind at work, and you hear that voice, and you recognize every time he sat down at the piano, even if it was just for himself, even if he was alone, he delivered. Every time. You hear that voice, you hear those hands on those keys, you hear the importance of music in his life, and you hear that he never took it for granted. He never treated it disrespectfully. He sat at the piano and he performed, even if he was all alone. Not many artists do that. So every single day I'd be moving a microphone. And while he was waiting for me to set things up, he'd be at the piano and never just singing under his breath, singing, really singing as if he were on stage just to warm up. That was the approach that he brought to his craft. Every day was thrilling with him.
Well, one of the themes of the book is this notion of prototyping and demoing. I think one of the things that impedes creativity the most is fear of failure, fear that it won't be perfect, that it's not what you had in your mind. And I think that inhibits so many of us. But the idea of demoing or prototyping is almost like, don't worry about it. Just take a crack at it, see what it looks like. So maybe each of you could reflect a little bit on the role of producing the demo. And the beauty of a demo is you can try it with one groove and then say, okay, let's try it with a different groove. There are so many legendary stories from popular music of songs that the artist had in their head one way and the drummer lays down a different groove and they say, no, that's it. So talk a little bit about this whole idea of demoing and prototyping.
Well, in the book, we talk a lot about the fact that people tend to, creative people love the process as much as the outcome. As a matter of fact, they start often not with a very specific outcome in mind, but it's by engaging with the process, if you will, that they arrive wherever they were meant to. But if you think of the whole idea of how you learn music, well, the mistakes and the failures are an endemic part of the way that you learn an instrument, or often, in fact, they point you towards innovation. So in the book, we talk about Ike Turner and how the whole concept of distorted sound came about, right? And that's, I think, if I recall the story, the amplifier just fell from the truck while they were going to the gig, and then he just loved the sound, right? So often what's thought of as a mistake, that's where the innovation is. But we also talk with Justin Timberlake about the way that he goes about writing songs. And he says, well, the best tip I ever got is from Max Martin, who is outside of John Lennon and Paul McCartney, maybe the greatest hit songwriter, certainly of the last 20 years. And he says, hey, the only way you get to a good song is just to keep on writing. And Justin has this expression when he's in the studio. He says, look, I'm going to dare to suck, but I'm going to try something. So this embracing failure not as something terminal, but as a step towards something that will lead you to whatever outcome you're meant to have is a critical part of the creative process. And ultimately critical part of the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, it's IDEO was saying about prototypes is that prototypes aren't answers, they're questions. And so often when you're demoing something, you're prototyping it, you're not trying to solve a problem. You're trying to share your intent with somebody so that they can react, they can respond. And then it goes from just being an idea to something that can be collaborative, that someone else can help build on. And I think that's the secret that most people don't understand. I think they get in their head, they have to have the right idea to share, to demonstrate an idea, and they let perfection hold them back. But when you embrace this idea that you're not trying to solve, you're not trying to answer it, you're just trying to ask another question so that people can work with you, it's a lot more freeing. And then the failure doesn't even feel like the right word anymore, right? It just feels like it's a step on a journey towards something.
A lot of times you have to hear something in order to know what it is. Sometimes you have to build it so that you can see it, and then you rebuild it. We were talking earlier before everyone joined us for the webinar, we were talking about When Doves Cry, and it was reminding me when Prince originally recorded When Doves Cry, it was actually a really heavy song. If you can imagine it, it was heavy rock guitar. It was very rhythm heavy, drums, bass, and these big power chords on guitar. And he was singing over the top of it, "This is what it sounds like when doves cry." That's not at all what it sounds like when doves cry. He was talking about a gentle thing that has been laid low. And he was smart enough. I mean, the record was mixed. It was ready to go out the door, and he realized this won't work. It just won't work. These parts aren't creating a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. So he stripped it all back, and he kept just the drum machine, kept the main melody, but rather than have it be heavy, he came up with that kind of, it was kind of like a kalimba part, but marimba part, really. Dun, 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 more staccato. He kept it light. He let it float. And then when he sang, "This is what it sounds like when doves cry," it felt like that. And he realized that he had enough rhythm in the track that you can mute the bass and you don't need any more rhythm. You don't need any more harmony. You don't need any more melody. Everything's being covered by these few parts here. We're done. It was a big career-making single for him when he had the courage to totally redo it.
Yeah. That reminds me, like when I was recording with Chuck, and we was doing Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos. And we had two problems. One was we couldn't get Flav in the studio because he was MIA. And then Chuck had a severe cold. And I thought, and you know, and working on the project, we did a lot of things just like that. I put a lot of instrumentation, all kinds of stuff that was going on, and the record lost its honesty. It lost its innocence. And so we just decided. I just said, let's just strip everything back. And then instead of waiting for Chuck to get well or to get better, I just said, listen, let's put him on the microphone. Get him in there, and I think that the fact that he had a cold added to the ominous vibration that I wanted to get out of it, and the whole song is about basically Chuck going through a prison. We go a prison break, and at the end of it, it becomes a successful jailbreak, so to speak. And this whole thing happens in one setting, and I just wanted to make sure that feeling was conveyed so well. And it was funny because at the time, the only person that I've ever allowed into the studio to come in was an artist named Romeo Blue at the time, which was and Lisa Bonet. and so I let who's Lenny Kravitz and Lisa come into the studio and listen to that one song. I thought maybe it was a song we was going to throw away or something because I didn't think that it was going to work, But when she gave me the reaction that she gave me, which was, this was amazing. She said it was very emotional. And that's when I realized that I think that the song was worthy enough, at least to be on the album. And it was probably one of the records that started what I consider to be the whole West Coast G-funk kind of vibration.
Hank, I wanted to ask you about something. I was talking with a former student yesterday, and he's now the drummer and producer of the band Big Thief. And we were talking about first take energy versus 10th take. And they're in the studio. I think they're making their 5th album now. And he said, James Krivchenya is his name. And he said, I love first take energy. And I'm always going to be the one in the room who wants to go with the initial gestures, the first take. But my bandmates don't necessarily like that, because it's technically not perfect and they want to keep working through it. But it's a trade-off, and you have to decide ultimately, what are we going to go with? Are we going to go with intentionality and the initial raw gestures, or are we going to go with perfected technique? What do you prefer? Do you have a preference?
Well, yeah, to me, that it all depends on what it is that we're trying to achieve. Because to me, records, I let records find a spot. I don't try to force it into a place, because music should talk to you. And if it's talking to you and you're open enough to understand, to feel the energy, it will tell you exactly what it needs. So for example, it might need the first take energy of the drums, but not necessarily the rest of the instruments. You know, so for example, when I was recording I guess Rebel Without a Pause, I used Flavor to program part of the drums. And Flavor's timing was not very, very good. But the thing that I wanted from it was I wanted that innocence. I wanted it to feel like somebody was not a professional on this. So his energy fit just right. And to me, it was the missing piece of the entire puzzle, which to me made that record, you know, iconic. And that was Public Enemy's first record that actually launched them into the you know, the music sphere, if you want, or the rap sphere, if you want to call it that.
So good, knowing how to spice or flavor your creativity with elbows, with imperfections, with thorns, just knowing how to use those things that poke out. It's actually, in a weird way, it's kind of a generous gesture when you show your audience that you're okay to play the fool, you're okay to do something embarrassing, you're okay to make a mistake. When you show them that, it kind of is generous. It lets people relax. It lets them know, okay, if it's okay for them to make mistakes, it's okay for me to make mistakes too. I guess we're cool here. It's a generous thing. You have to set your ego aside to be able to do it, but to know how to use imperfection is underappreciated.
Well, I think this is what's interesting about organizations. We tend to expect perfection versus embracing that often innovation comes through the acceptance of imperfection. Because to your point, Susan, if you create that environment where people are not afraid to look quote unquote imperfect, where they don't have to treat everything that every idea that they bring to the table as the definitive idea, not the demo, but the finished product,
Right.
then ultimately you create an organizational culture that's not afraid to try. And it's through the trying that you're advancing.
Yeah, I'd like to just reverse a little bit to the topic right before that, Panos, which was both Hank and Susan were talking about sensing, feeling, like knowing through feeling, like knowing whether something's good. And you know, there's actually a chapter in the book about sensing, about using our five senses, using our body to understand things, you know, and obviously in music, you both just illustrated this, that it's not about technical perfection that makes something good. There's another aspect of this human element, and I think, Panos, part of what you're saying there is true in that, you know, our imperfections as humans actually can make something more relatable, make it better, as you said, Susan. I'm curious, you know, we talk about an artist's ability to know how to tap into that in the book. So, you know, we use an example of an artist we met named Yoko Sen, who she's an electronic musician. She had an illness, was in the hospital, and she started just to be driven crazy by all the alarms on all the medical equipment because of the dissonance. Like for her, you know, the function was not as important to her as the emotional response to all of it. And it actually put her on this journey to begin working with medical equipment producers to reimagine how you might orchestrate the sound of healthcare. So I'm just curious, you know, from your own experiences where you've been in additional situations where you can see that there might be a rational choice to make, but the rational choice isn't actually the right choice, right? There's a different choice you're making. It's an emotional choice that you're making that takes it in the right direction.
It's really hard.
I'm going to jump in and pose a question that's so consistent with that. This is from Robert Schultz, and Melissa Howe is helping us curate some questions, who asked, I'm interested in the intersection of music and patient advocacy in the life science industry, where Boston is one of the best in the world, specifically empathy and building trust with patients. Can you talk about the role of empathy in music and how it can be used as a tool to transcend the life science industry? And then in parentheses, should we organize a biotech Woodstock? But I think it kind of goes to that question, Michael, of applications to other industries.
There's some fun, well, fun, if you like that sort of thing, science out there. There's a lot of science that shows when you give little children music lessons, the children that are taking music lessons will show you on tests of empathy afterwards that their empathy scores go up. Because when you make music with people, you have to look at them and you have to coordinate your motion with theirs. You have to look them in the eye, you have to anticipate their gestures and synchronize your body to theirs. So we know that music making causes empathy scores to go up. So that just poses an interesting question. Should there be Medici orchestras? Should there be, should medical professionals have to play music with one another, with their patients maybe, even if you're just, you know, playing claves or wood blocks or something, shakers, whatever, to look people in the eye and synchronize your body to theirs is definitely good for other kinds of pro-social behaviors too, empathy and cooperation and things like that. It's not a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me, one of the things that I try to do is when I'm mixing a record or when I'm in that mix phase of a record, I never can mix a record inside the control room with speakers looking at me, because I've always thought that's just not a practical way that people take music. And usually when you're listening to music, you're walking, you're moving about. You're either in your car, you're either in a shopping center, you're somewhere on the go. And so I mixed most of my records from out in the hallway in the room with the door open.
Oh,
because I want to feel that energy. I just want to feel what the whole thing sounds like from a distance. And that tells me a lot more on what needs to be elevated, what needs to be lowered, what needs to be brought up. And the end result is the mix to me isn't great unless I get that kind of like chill on almost the goosebumps feeling that you would get when you're chilly, when you're a little bit chilly, but not really cold. I want to feel that energy from the mix. And if I can feel that energy, that's when I know this record is ready.
And we're finding that the best organizations and the best companies, they're able to achieve that emotional resonance, whether it's between their services or their products and their customers. And in my view, the best managers and the best CEOs are able to achieve that emotional resonance with the people that they work with. So even though we're talking about these musical concepts, this idea of empathy and of having this sort of intuitive connection with the people that you work with, or for your customers to have this deep emotional, almost cult-like connection to what you're putting out there is so critical. And again, musicians do this intuitively, but many organizations forget that, whether it's on the management level or on the product level.
I want to ask you guys questions, what you think about, it's the same thing for musicians as it is with companies, but should we try to keep up with trends or should we just do what we do? Let it pass. If the times are going to pass, just let it pass. Or should we try to stay current? What's your thinking on that? It's a tough one.
For me, I the way I think about that is I'm always curious about why. I'm more curious about the why than the what, or even the how, actually. So for example, NFTs are in the news right now a lot. A lot of money distracting the conversation. My interest in that is not the technology. It's actually why is it suddenly interesting? Because it's a technology that's actually been around for a while. And then what is prior art that might show the same, might be instructive about the same behaviors that are happening. So you can look at, when I look at something like NFTs, I see, for example, one model I see is co-ownership is a really interesting model in that idea. And I can look back at why co-ops came together. How did those work? What were the benefits that people had from those? And I tend to look at most technology in that way now. I'm just curious about the why, because you can figure out the why. You always find an expert around you. I think, Roger, you were saying this earlier. You always find an expert around you that understands it technically better than you, but you might philosophically understand how to use it better because you're not distracted by the noise.
Yeah.
So that's been my approach anyway.
Susan, I remember an interview with Pat Metheny, who I think will probably go down as one of the most influential musicians of our lifetimes. And someone said, why do you think you've had, success in reaching the audience you have? And he said, I decided to make music for my friends and not my idols. Mm. And so one thing I think that students at music schools need to think about is that pleasing your professors is all well and good, but they're not really likely to be your audience. So I think making the music you want to make for the people you want to make it for, I think is important. And honestly, if you're gonna have success in the pop music world, you probably better be listening and thinking about trends. But there's so many other ways you can roll. That's just one limited approach. But I remember being really impressed by that comment from Pat. And sometimes I feel like at Berklee, we need to give students permission to make music that we don't like that much. Because if I like it too much, that may not be a good sign.
Look at that.
And I think it's true for the business world. A very well-known entrepreneur, Bill Werner, who started a company called Avid, told me, don't confuse invention with intention. And I think this is what we're talking about, that at the end of the day, customers can read your intention. Don't let the invention, if you will, confuse what it is. People can read authenticity, whether it's in the song or whether it's in an experience that they're having somewhere. So I think that truth comes through, that intention comes through irrespective of the invention. So if you get too bogged down with ultimately the what rather than the why, as Michael was saying, then that's certainly not a path to any success.
Yeah. Hank, how do you feel about that artistically? What is your thought on that?
It's funny because, I think in terms of the analog versus digital revolution that we went through. And, when I did all my early stuff on analog gear, and then when this computer came in and I found that you could have DAWs and you can have plugins and all these different things, I ditched my entire studio with all the equipment that I had to be totally inside the box. Then I realized that in the box wasn't giving me the same emotional feeling that I was getting from the stuff that I was doing before. So then I brought my stuff back out, and now I'm hybriding, and I think that it taught me one valuable lesson, is that I don't think that anything ever goes out of style. I think that we just happen to transition into other areas, but we're comfortable living in a hybrid world. We're using tape machines along with digital hardware and software. So it's a marriage now that's making music better, as long as you don't forget the stuff that you know in the past and be able to forge it with the stuff that you're learning in the future.
Think of it like a tree, not a straight line. It's just a new technology is just a new branch. It doesn't mean that we have to ditch what came before.
I'm going to pose a few of the questions from the audience so we get them involved a little bit. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Panay Nag asked, can you highlight your views on the modern DIY and YouTube? And he didn't, or she didn't say this, but TikTok approaches. How do you think this is shaping modern music? And I'll tag on another question, which is an observation that all these tools could make music less collaborative. But ironically, music has never been more collaborative. There never been more co-writers on songs and sampling and all the the exchanges that are happening. So just reflect a little bit on the do-it-yourself world and what that's meaning for the future of music.
Well, my view is that they're aiding to an explosion of creativity. And we often think of mediums as purely carrying a message, but I feel what's interesting is to explore how the mediums are informing that very message. So there's things that we can do today because of these platforms that you're talking about, Roger, that simply we would have just not done even 5 or 10 years ago. And maybe an analog from a different era is to look at the way that multi-track recording forever changed the very expression of music as much as just capturing it, right? So it wasn't just capturing a more true sound, it was also changing the way that people went about creating sound. So I think the same thing with all these platforms, that the best applications of them are ones that truly take advantage of the format and the medium in itself to reinvent the very expressiveness, if you will, behind it.
The connected world has been so wonderful for music in this century. I just heard a piece of music this morning that it was reggae and the bass drums and the rhythm guitar. And then the whole top line was kind of a rock kind of thing. It was from Colombia and it was sung in Spanish and it was a wonderful hybrid. Now everyone has the whole world of music right at their fingertips. It's remarkable how they're innovating, but we don't get new music unless there are people who are brave enough to try these outrageous forms. And I love what folks are doing today with ambient sounds and what they're doing with, well, you know, noise pop and glitch hop, and the late great artist Sophie, what she did with that hyper pop, to be brave enough to stretch music out of shape and to see just how far you can stretch it before it breaks. I think that's what the globalization and innovation of music has done for us. That's what, when you get DIYers who don't know what they're doing, maybe they don't have any music theoretic knowledge, but when you get them playing around with musical tools, you're going to get expressions that the trained musicians might never have thought of. So it's going to be good for the art form. We have to wait and see who makes money at it in the next few years, but it's not going to hurt the art, I don't believe.
I think you're. No, I think that you're. I think that's right on. That couldn't be, you know, more true or said. But I also look at the fact that all the technology that we have today is also aiding to the destruction of genre. And I think that that's the thing that's so exciting for me. It's kind of like the Baskin and Robbins approach to ice cream. It's like, you know, I want to have mint mocha, you know, ice cream as opposed to just the traditional vanilla, strawberry, and chocolate. And I think that these are the kinds of things that I think that I find interesting. There's all kinds of musical art forms today that's exploring culture. And I find that the mix of culture with electronics is becoming like a thing that I'm gravitating towards like crazy. And anything that I'm listening to now, I'm impressed by that, because culture is the thing that we have to fight to kind of like preserve in a way, because everything is becoming homogenous.
Yeah, and you can't have a counterculture if there's a multiculture. There's nothing to push against.
That's right. Wow, that's amazing. Can I quote you on that?
I'm quoting someone else, and I don't remember where I read it. It was years ago, but someone in the newspaper said, you know, you can't have a counterculture in a multiculture. He was prescient.
So a question from Eugenio Pimenta. With the growth of artificial intelligence, AI, dominating all kinds of businesses, the demand for compartmental skills will increase exponentially. Music education practice has the power of developing collaboration, listening, experimentation. Do you agree? What needs to be done to enhance musical practice within schools and companies? And how can these skills work in this AI world where more of the rote, the way I take this question, more of the rote activities will be done for us and we're left with the most creative aspects where this kind of collaboration will be so important.
For me, technology has always been never a replacement, but always a partner to the expression of human creativity in any way. And maybe staying close to music, when the drum machine first came about, I think people were wailing that maybe that would be the end of drummers. Well, and Roger, you're a drummer and you're still around. And I feel that similar to the business world, technology has there to make us more productive, more efficient, but ultimately rid us maybe of mundane things so we can focus on the thing that is the most human of all, and that is creativity. I've said that the most resonant and the most important distinguishing factor that we have as humans is our imagination or creativity. Science, mathematics, they're fundamentally products of a creative imagination that humans develop to explain the world around us. So I don't see technology as a threat any more than I see the ability to use an online word processor to write a novel. They will never write as well as you do, but they're there to sort of make things easier, get rid of all the distractions so you can focus on the thing that you do the best and partner with it to create even something bigger than you plus machine.
Yeah, you can see a lot of creative professions evolving and where the roles are more curatorial than they are actually generative, because there's so many ways to generate ideas now, or to draw from different content, but it still takes a person's ingenuity and creativity to understand how these things connect together, understand why they might on surface not look like they belong, but together create a new exciting thing. I mean, Hank, and all your records, when you're putting all those samples together, you are epitomizing this concept, this curatorial view of understanding why these things might connect to create something new and whole. And I think that's the mindset that we'll all continue to need to develop as these technologies advance.
And I also think that that's very important for teaching as well. I think that the role, because you have, you know, online tutorials and things of that nature that's you know, flooding the internet. I think that the role of a teacher now becomes more of a how would you say it, a curator of events. You're the person that's going to be now giving the why, you know, like because everybody can tell you what it does and how it works. But who can tell you what's the reason for using it in the first place? And why is it essential? Those are the areas that I think that where teaching is going to eventually have to move towards and to create a greater engagement in the students.
The question,
We got probably time for one more question. And this one I wanted to bring up because I almost think the question answers itself. Is from Aaron Halevi. Hello from South Africa. How does this all apply to us creatives in Africa, where access to technology and this incredible wisdom is not easy for everyone to connect with? First, I would say I understand, but on the other hand, you are with us and you are tapping this creative energy. And I have a prediction. I think the music of Africa is going to become extremely influential in the larger world. We're already seeing it happen. There's a Berklee alum named Tiwa Savage in Nigeria who I love. I knew her as a student. I think the musical DNA of the continent is so rich and there's so many different styles and flavors of music. So first, I would just encourage you to not see that as a disadvantage. Like in the United States, the most influential music didn't come from the wealthiest people or the people with the most resources or the most technology. It almost was the opposite. So the first thing I would say is don't be discouraged and have a lot of confidence that the materials you have to draw on are powerful. But I guess I'd ask the rest of the panel, do you have any thoughts about this, this whole issue of kind of the global elements in modern music?
I'm reminded of years ago, Hank was talking about analog tape. When we worked on analog tape, we had 24 tracks. And the kinds of records that we made then had to go from the materials to the vision. You had to take the materials that you had, the tracks you had, and especially if you're doing a debut record, you didn't have a lot, you didn't have a big budget. You had to work from your materials to your vision. If you've ever seen video of Motown Studios in Detroit, that room where they made those hit records is so small. That control room is so tiny. They were all crammed in there. They worked from the materials to the vision every day, and they were one of the most influential voices in all of music. Now that we have digital technology where you push a button and you've got a didgeridoo or you've got a perfect kick drum, it's possible to now work from the vision to the materials. You have your vision first, and then you go find the materials because it's easy to find if you've got technology, and you can build the thing you can imagine in your mind's ear. Don't forget that the history of popular music went the other way. It went from the materials to the vision. Take the materials that you've got and craft a vision out of what you have, and you'll be in fine shape. You've got nothing to worry about, even with very few limited materials. It's the vision that matters.
Hank, any parting thoughts?
Yes, I mean, just one last thing is just the fact that I think that that's the future of artists today. I think that artists have to now have a narrative to display when they're presenting their music, because of the fact that everything is in a point of television exposure. Everything is very visual, so we have to think about that narrative.
Beautiful. Panos, Michael, anything you'd like to say to wrap up?
Well, for us, we talked a lot about music, but ultimately I'd like our audience to just keep thinking of the transferability of these mindsets. So whether it's the ability to listen to the environment around you, Hank and Susan talked a lot about this concept of remixing old stuff to create something new. That's in many ways the definition of innovation. The ability to sense and emote and connect, the ability to present effectively a message using a medium as a tool, but also a partner. These are critical mindsets that we think are not just present among musicians, but we think that they're important mindsets to cultivate among a generation of people who's inheriting a very complicated world. So at the end of the day, we feel that creative education belongs up there on the same level as science and math and technology, because it's this ability to synthesize complex concepts and create something new that ultimately will help us as humanity to transition to this next stage. So that's the theme of Two Beats Ahead, and I think a lot of what you heard in this panel.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time. I'd love to go on further. I want to thank you all for joining us. Sorry to those of you who had great questions that we didn't get to, but the book will answer some of those. And then I would say, even put the book aside, most of the answers are probably right within you. Just have confidence, don't operate out of fear, operate collaboratively, listen, prototype, demo, and you'll make some great things happen. So thank you for joining us, and all the best to all of you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
See you all. Hank, Susan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.